Content warning. Episodes of Grey Matter may contain themes and depictions of extreme mental illness, traumatic bodily harm, and death. If you aren't in the right headspace to engage with those depictions right now, maybe this episode should wait for another time. Otherwise, proceed with caution.
Welcome back to Grey Matter. Haven't seen you for a while. Road trip, huh? Must be nice, hitting the open road and seeing where it takes you. Some of us have to work for a living. You think this place gives out vacation time? Oh no, we get sick time, but that's just to stave off the effects of long-term exposure. Either way, I'd love to get out of here. Cruise down the highway, eat at a roadside diner, anything to break up the monotony. Here, anytime I get that distant look in my eye or wanderlust rises up from my stomach like hopeful bile, this tape always manages to make me regret it. It's called In the Headlights, and it's a story about a boy on the verge of becoming a man who wants nothing more than to watch his little town shrink in his rearview mirror. But sad to say, there are things you can't outrun, and freedom always comes with consequences.
In the Headlights, written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and adapted from his short story of the same name. There's something about a small town that's claustrophobic. Even if you grew up there, even if everyone you know and love lives within walking distance, there's an undeniable air of quiet suffocation. You become stuck in familiar ruts, shuffled from one social category into another and back again because nothing really fits. People remember you for who your father was, or who you were in the 5th grade, rather than putting the work in to learn who you are now. In the weeks leading up to my 18th birthday, I already knew I needed a fresh start. I wanted to see the world, or at least the country, and I wanted to feel the wind in my hair and the hum of an engine beneath my feet. I needed freedom. The kind I was promised by the movies. My friends and I had made a promise too, buoyed by the bleak awareness of oncoming adulthood, that when the first of us turned 18, the 4 of us would take one last bike ride out to our usual spot. It was a way to celebrate, I guess, but as we rode out of town that afternoon, it felt more like a funeral. We passed from identical rows of small houses into expansive farmland, rolling past cornfields and grazing cows as the early autumn sun sank in the sky. By the time we reached the top of Bachman Hill, the sky had turned from orange to soft blue. And as we passed the abandoned lot where the local cops slept off hangovers in their parked cruisers, it started to feel like this part of the world was too far out from the rest to ever really change. We turned down the road into Brolin's junkyard and passed the crooked dead-end sign. At the end of the road, we could see the old, overgrown baseball field, where I had drank my first beer and lit my first firework. The lopsided old dugouts looked almost gold in the dwindling sunlight, and the tangled, unkempt grass seemed to ripple in the breeze. While Tim dragged out the small grill we had hidden inside one of the dugouts and Doug caught his breath, Patrick and I unpacked the cooler. Soon, everything was like it had always been, a night of quiet relaxation and aimless conversation. What a shame it was the last one.
What is that, Patrick? Your 3rd?
4th.
Are you trying to get arrested for biking under the influence?
No, Brandon, I'm trying to see if I can get the mosquitoes drunk.
Did Any of you guys see that meteor shower last night?
No, I must have missed it, Doug. Tim?
Huh? Oh, yeah, it wasn't anything special, just bright.
Very bright. It woke me up.
What? How? It was like 11.
Well, you see, Doug here has the sprightly energy of a 70-year-old woman, so he goes to bed right after he eats dinner at 4 p.m. He even wheezes like one.
Oof.
I don't mean anything by it. I just thought he'd grow out of the asthma, that's all.
And I thought you'd grow out of being a dickhead. But life is full of disappointments.
Not bad.
I gotta pee.
Well, don't do it here. Go in the field. See if you can find any of the balls you've lost here over the years.
I'll see if I can find your balls.
What?
You know, this doesn't have to be the last time we do this. We got most of the school year left. You hear me?
Yeah, but, you should tell them, Brandon.
Come on, man. Not now.
Then when?
Tell us what?
Brandon's moving at the end of the month. He's got an apartment lined up a couple of states away.
What? Are you serious?
What about school?
I'm dropping out. I'm gonna get my GED instead.
You're really leaving.
I thought you and Tim were gonna get an apartment together after graduation.
Not anymore.
You weren't going to tell us?
No, I didn't know how. I have to get out of here. Away from my dad, away from this town. I need somewhere that I can be someone different.
And what, you were just gonna ditch us?
I just need a life I can live on my own terms.
You can do that here. I told you, we can help. I can help.
No, I can't stay here.
You...
What is that?
Must be from the junkyard. I wonder if...
Well, there you go. Now...
Okay, what the fuck?
I'm gonna go check it out.
What? No.
Come on, man. What if someone's hurt? What if old man Brolin had a heart attack or something?
I don't like this.
Let's go check it out. If it turns out to be nothing, then we could just come back.
We should really... Shit. All right.
I guess I'll go too. I'm curious.
Well, I'm not. Besides, I think somebody should stay with the bikes.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Nobody's gonna make you come if you don't want to.
Yeah, I'll... Yeah.
Patrick took off running through the open field, jumping over ruts and pushing through the tangled grass. As Tim and I struggled to keep up, he broke out into a full sprint and widened the gap between us, then jumped up onto the metal fence surrounding Brolin's junkyard and started to climb it. Tim and I reached the fence just as Patrick dropped down onto the other side and started to climb as he called back to us.
I'm gonna go on ahead. I'll see if I can find Brolin.
I hope you know that conversation isn't over.
That conversation was over between you and me last week.
They deserved to know sooner. I deserve to know sooner, especially after...
Yeah, why do you think I have to leave?
You don't. It's not the 80s anymore. People will understand.
Not around here, they won't.
At least let me come with you, then. We can go wherever you want. Just don't leave me here alone. Listen, we don't have to talk about what happened if you don't want to, but I'm not sorry. And you shouldn't be either.
He swung his legs over the fence and dropped to the dirt. I followed. We crept forward down the dirt path underneath a line of faded yellow streetlights, passing by lopsided piles of rusted-out cars and bins full of loose parts, then stepped around a slanted pile of old cars and saw Patrick. He was near the melted remains of a broken-down truck, standing just at the edge of a broad, blackened circle of charred dirt surrounding it. At the truck's center was a massive hole, its uneven, liquefied edges still a smoldering orange.
What is that?
Brolin's tow truck.
What happened to it? A meteor?
I don't know. But that's not the part I'm worried about. See that trail? That purple streak? It starts just under the wheel well, winds up the side of the charred circle, then disappears in the dirt.
What the hell?
Maybe Brolin's dog was inside it when the meteor hit? And it crawled off somewhere to die?
Then why did we just hear it barking?
The three of us exchanged nervous looks, then turned back towards the center of the junkyard, barely visible in the flickering yellow light between tall piles of appliances and vehicles. There, on a concrete foundation at the edge of a wide clearing, sat Brolin's trailer. The side of the old man's home had been smashed in, and the roof was half collapsed around the fallen wall. The door sat snapped in two in front of the lopsided frame, and a splotchy streak of dried blood ran from inside down to the dirt, where it had formed a flaking, scabby puddle surrounded by a cloud of flies. As strange as it all was, it barely seemed to hold my attention. My eyes were fixed on the vehicle sitting nearby. It was a black muscle car, angular and waxed to a shine, with the rounded front bumper of a '69 Mustang and bright purple racing stripes that ran in jagged, geometric lines from the tip of its hood all the way back to its taillights. The car's surface looked less like painted metal and more like a rigid, bumpy shell, with tight rows of raised spikes that lined the adjacent edges of interlocking plates. Its wheels were thick and densely ridged, with rounded hubcaps the color of sun-bleached bone. I walked towards it in nervous awe, glancing back at Patrick and Tim as they stared at the gore streaked down the front of Brolin's trailer. Either they were moving in slow motion, or I was moving too fast, but they didn't even notice as I reached out to touch the strange muscle car's hood. I ran my hand across its surface, my fingers sliding along the bumpy, crab-shell texture as I looked through the tinted windows at the dash for a registration sticker. Whoever's car it was, it had to have been a custom job, and a pretty intricate one at that. I pulled on the handle and the door swung open, revealing an empty driver's seat inside. The interior was gray leather with hardly any visible seams, and the material was speckled with tiny bumps that reminded me of the surface of a tongue. Definitely a custom job. Must have cost a fortune.
Hey, don't touch anything!
What the fuck happened here? All this blood.
I don't see a reg anywhere. I'm gonna check in the glove box.
What did I just say?
I rested my left hand on the bright purple steering wheel and reached over for the glove box with my right. But before I opened it, I glanced forward to look out the windshield. It was like I could already see the yellow and white lines of the highway in front of me, stretching out from here to flat eternity with my foot on the pedal. What a rush, just the thought of it. It was almost intoxicating. It was more than a car. It was freedom. The kind of freedom I had been waiting so long for. I pulled open the glove box and shot back in my seat. A black, bulging shark eye stared out at me from inside, surrounded by thick folds of knotted purple flesh. It blinked, pulling the flesh in around it like a closing camera lens, then opened again even wider. I felt something warm on my hand and looked over to see that the steering wheel was bubbling up around my fingers like wet cement. I pulled against it, thrashing in the gray leather seat, but I couldn't get free. A spike of thin, chalk-white bone shot up from inside the wheel and pierced my palm, then pushed through the meat of my hand and out the other side. As I watched, the end of the bone sprouted into a gnarled spur, each barb sticking out like the spike of a sea urchin. The purple flesh oozing over my hand was burning now, eating away at my skin like acid as I tried to pull in enough breath to scream. I could see Tim and Patrick through the windshield, but they weren't even looking in my direction. Help me! I'm stuck! It's got me!
What did you say?
It's got me! A seatbelt made of red, mottled flesh shot across my shoulder and down to my hip, where it dug itself into a jagged slot of bone next to the seat. In a flash, it tightened across my chest like a boa constrictor. Tiny lines of jagged saw teeth pressed out through its edges and stabbed into my shirt, then extended further and punctured my chest as I winced with pain. Tim ran over to the side of the car and grabbed my arm, trying to pull me out, then looked past me at the eye in the glove box. His face went white.
What? What is...
It's not me. It started itself.
What are you guys doing over there?
There's something wrong with the car. Brandon's stuck inside.
What?
The car suddenly lurched forward. As Patrick dove out of the way, the car jerked into a jarring swerve, then straightened out and charged forward again, this time trying to run down Tim. I slammed my foot down onto the brake and the car shuddered to a screeching stop. I could hear the engine revving, gears grinding loudly from under the hood, then felt the tooth-covered seatbelt tighten over my chest. It pressed against my ribs, slowly pushing them inward as I struggled to breathe. Fuck you. The teeth on the seatbelt started grinding, sawing into my flesh like a serrated knife as hot blood started to stream down. I knew what it wanted. I knew how to get it to stop the pain, but I couldn't just... Tim swung a long piece of scrap metal against the window beside me, then pulled it back and tried again when it didn't crack.
I'm gonna get you out of there. Just hold on.
Next to my leg, a bony gear shift jerked into reverse and the brake pad lost pressure under my foot. The car swung to one side, slamming into Tim, then lurched back into drive and shot forward. Across the clearing, at the center of the junkyard, I could see Patrick running, pumping his arms furiously as he sprinted for the fence. The car charged after him, weaving between piles of stacked scrap metal, its engine rumbling and revving like the bellow of an alligator, and in a second it was on his heels. Patrick looked over his shoulder and missed a step, then tumbled forward and fell to the ground. He turned, just in time for his head to splatter against the car's oncoming bumper, and I heard a sickening thump as his body rolled under the wheels. Thin, chalk-white wipers swept across the windshield, streaking the splatter of bright red blood and pulped skull from one side of the glass to the other. In the driver's seat, I felt like I was going to throw up. The car backed over the body with a series of muffled cracks, then turned and made a wide circle back towards where it had lost Tim. My free hand shot up to the wheel in a panicked reflex, and I pulled it to the right. We swerved into a pile of scrap metal and screeched to a stop. I looked down at my hands as the purple flesh covering my left seeped up around my right, and after only a second I felt the telltale burning of the acid doing its work. My hands were frozen now, melted at 10 and 2 by a sickening organic mix of napalm and superglue. The car's engine roared, less like a rumbling machine than a crude imitation of one, and after only a second it lurched backward out of the pile of fallen scrap and swung wide around it. The gas pedal moved beneath me, knocking against my ankles, but the brake had fallen flat to the floor. No matter how many times I stomped, I knew it wouldn't work again. This thing, whatever it was, wouldn't fall for the same trick twice. The car circled the junkyard and made a wide loop around the inside of the fence, no doubt looking for any sign of Tim. I prayed it wouldn't find him. I could feel the purple flesh tightening around my melted hands, slipping narrow sinews in between folds of flesh and wrapping around my bones, and I wondered in terror how far up my arms it could stretch if it wanted to. I tried to lean forward in my seat, but the saw-blade seatbelt pulled me back again. The eye in the glove box rolled back and moved out of sight, shifting in the mounds of purple flesh, and as I heard a wet thump at the front of the car, I wondered if the eye had repositioned itself for a better look. The car slowed to a stop and turned off its lights, and as I waited, the rumble of the engine lowered to a barely audible purr. I waited, my dissolving hands shaking on the wheel, glancing back and forth between the mirrors. We were alone now, weren't we? It had killed Patrick, scared off Tim, trapped me for easy digestion. What else could it possibly want? Suddenly, the headlights flashed back on, illuminating Tim's huddled form in the powerful beams as he crept out from behind a pile of scrap. He froze, staring blankly into the light, and finally I understood. He had been hiding, and it knew he had been hiding. The car shot forward as Tim started running, bearing down on him as he scrambled up onto a stack of old cars and jumped for the fence. He landed halfway up, his hands almost slipping as they white-knuckle gripped the metal, and after taking a second to steady himself, he started climbing in a panicked white heat. The car slammed through the fence just underneath him, and as it kept driving, I heard him bounce down onto the roof and roll off above me. In a second, he was up again, tearing through the field's tangled grass towards the old baseball diamond in a desperate, limping run. He looked like a wounded animal in the black of the night, some barely conscious piece of roadkill trying to make it back to a safe, dry den to die in. The car slid into a patch of tall grass and spun out, its wheels uprooting bits of overgrown brush, then blasted forward furiously into the field, bouncing back and forth across the uneven ground. I tried to squint through the splintered branches and sprays of dirt as they rolled up over the hood and smacked against the windshield, but somewhere up ahead I had lost sight of Tim. The field stretched out like a blanket of bumpy green ahead of us, and once we got past the outfield, I could see Doug's silhouette standing next to our bikes. He was aimlessly tossing a baseball up into the air and catching it, staring up absent-mindedly at the star-filled sky. I tried to move one of my hands to the horn, but when I felt my melted fingers start to separate from my palm with a sickening rip, I decided to keep them where they were. But I had to warn him somehow, didn't I? I threw my head back and swung it down into the center of the steering wheel, sending a loud, bassy honk booming out across the field. Doug's head turned at the sound, and in a moment, he was running for the trees, desperately trying to get to the only place the oncoming car couldn't follow. I leaned my head back on the headrest and sighed, barely noticing the blood trickling down from my broken nose. Why hadn't he gone for one of the bikes? Maybe it wouldn't have been enough to save him. Maybe nothing was. But at least he could have gotten a head start. I tried my best to give him a fighting chance, and soon I'd know if it had mattered. Tim had managed to give us the slip. Maybe Doug could too. I felt something sharp press into the back of my neck, then rapidly spin to push through and dig into the flesh. It wedged itself in at the base of my skull, piercing the bone with a sickening crack, and as I felt it press deeper inside, I saw flecks of white at the edges of my vision. I stared out through the windshield as the car swung right and sideswiped Doug, listened to his legs snap as he smashed into the hood. He fell to the dirt in a mangled heap, wheezing for a breath that wouldn't come. Then he pulled his limp legs behind him, both bent unnaturally and half pulped into dead weight, stretched out an arm, and started to drag himself through the dirt. The car slowly circled, its engine humming with the contentment of a predator moving in for the kill, then slowed to a stop just in front of him and put itself into park. Doug looked up and saw me on the other side of the windshield. As I watched, tears of confused betrayal welled up in his eyes just above his bleeding mouth.
Brandon? Why did... You don't have to do this. We just wanted you to stay. We're your friends.
The car shifted underneath me. Interlocking plates of bump-covered carapace slid apart on the hood, and it unfolded like a jagged clamshell. Instead of an engine, underneath the hood was a gigantic, gaping mouth of reddish-purple flesh, lined with long rows of razor-sharp teeth that spiraled inward and out of sight. A whip-like tongue lashed out over the front bumper and wound its way through the dirt towards Doug's mangled body, then slowly coiled itself around one of his broken legs. I couldn't watch, but it wouldn't let me look away. The tentacle tongue tugged at him, dragging Doug through the dirt towards the open mouth under the hood. He screamed, his fingernails leaving bloody trails on the ground, but soon enough it had him. The lashing tongue reared back and lifted him up into the air, dangling him from his shattered leg like a broken puppet, then dropped him down into the waiting pencil sharpener mouth below. His head was pulped in seconds, then tore off his neck along with his shoulders, his guts unwound from the inside, moving into the machine like sausage into a grinder, and finally, with the sudden motion of a leash tugging back a junkyard dog, the rest of his shredded body was pulled inside. When it was finished, the spinning mouth slowed to a stop. Hot blood streamed down the sides of the engine mouth and spattered to the dirt like ravenous drool as the clamshell carapace folded inward and slid back into its former place. I sat in the driver's seat in silent horror as the car's engine contentedly gurgled beneath me. First Patrick, now Doug. Even if I could get out, get away, get to anything approaching safety, what did I have left to go back to? Tim. Just Tim. That would be enough, wouldn't it? He would be enough. Wherever he was, I hoped he knew that. Then I saw him, a shrinking shadow on a bicycle passing the dead-end sign at the end of the small dirt road. He was pedaling like mad, weaving back and forth in a terrified panic, but just the sight of him made my heart leap in my chest. He'd gotten past us, snuck onto the bike while the car was feeding, and every second the thing didn't notice him was another second it would take to catch up. If he cut through the empty lot, made it to Bachman's Hill, let the momentum carry him down past the farms and back into town, maybe he really could make it. Tears welled up in my eyes and I smiled, then felt the bony drill in the back of my head start to spin again. A hot wash of pain radiated down my neck and I gasped, but as the car's engine rumbled louder beneath me, I felt the agony turn to electric ecstasy. The warm, heavy hum seemed to ripple up through the seat and directly into my body, washing over me in waves of powerful satisfaction as I moved my foot to the gas pedal. Tim's image rippled and swayed, washed out in radiant neon, and just before my vision went white, I saw him swerve his bike towards a patch of trees. With my last ounce of strength, I turned the wheel towards him. My eyes flashed open and started to focus. I could hear grinding metal, smell a sickly metallic scent that must have been blood, but I still couldn't move. I looked out through the shattered windshield to see the car's front half wrapped around a thick tree, its pencil sharpener mouth gushing purple blood as its tooth-covered tongue lashed weakly back and forth. Behind it, pinned to the half-smashed tree, was a mangled bicycle. I felt a cool breeze on my forehead, and my eyes looked over to see the passenger side door hanging open, the lock and door handle both destroyed and the window broken. The saw blade seatbelt on my chest relaxed, still slick with my blood as it sagged down to my stomach, and all at once I felt the purple flesh enveloping my hands pull back. It twisted and shrank, leaving my dissolved hands lying limply on the wheel. And as I closed my eyes to keep from looking at them, I felt the ivory drill at the back of my neck begin to slowly turn backwards and recede. I heard footsteps running through the grass outside and turned my head. Tim was running towards me, half limping with a long gash on one arm that told me everything I needed to know. He had bailed out at the last second, abandoned the bike, and rolled to safety as it crashed.
Brandon, are you okay? Are you hurt?
I can't feel my hands.
It's okay. You're gonna be okay.
I wanted to kill you, Tim. I wanted to run you down.
No, you didn't. Don't try to move, okay? I'm gonna see if I can rip that seatbelt off.
No, don't come in here. Don't touch anything. You'll end up like me.
You gotta let me help you, Brandon.
Tim, don't. Just let me die. Please. It's too late. I love you.
I love you too. I'm not gonna leave you, okay? I'll be right here. I'll stay.
God, it's still alive. The car shifted underneath me, flattening and straightening its frame back into shape. I felt the car rock as the tires reinflated, watched in horror as the glass knit itself back together to recreate the windshield. The hood bent and folded as new teeth grew to replace the old in the engine mouth, and the old tongue withered and died as a new one uncurled. I felt the wheel under my hands, inflating and depressing in rhythm like slow, steady breaths. The pedal rose to meet my foot as the seatbelt started to tighten, and I heard a soft whir as the drill just behind my head spun and twitched. I looked at Tim, his face streaked with dirt and tears, and as I watched, he moved his hand down towards the passenger seat. Don't. You've got to get out of here. You can't. Someone has to know.
I told you. I'm staying.
It'll kill you.
I don't care. I won't leave you alone.
He ducked into the car and sat down on the passenger seat, then pulled the door shut behind him. The lock clicked, and he reached for the seatbelt, stretching it across his chest as his hand clasped my shoulder. The car rumbled under us, then put itself into reverse and slowly backed away from the half-smashed tree, dropping bits of black carapace and white bone as it finished reconstructing. I watched new mirrors sprout and unfold like flowers, the glass grinding and gleaming as it flattened into shape, and when my eyes moved to the rearview mirror, I saw Tim looking back at me. The leather seat rippled beneath him, wriggling like a tongue as it started to rise up around his legs, and edges of pointed teeth started to sprout from the surface of the seatbelt around his chest. Please, don't hurt him. You can have me, just don't hurt him. The seat stopped moving, and the belt stayed loose. Tim smiled at me, and I tried to smile back through the pain, but it was easier once the drill at the back of my neck slipped back inside. I pressed down on the pedal, and the engine revved, sending a shock of raw euphoria rippling up my leg and through my entire body. My eyesight blurred and went white, but the world that faded back in was streaked with impossible color. A road of pink crystal stretched out in front of us underneath a neon sky, surrounded by twisted spires of rock that had once been trees. I pressed down on the gas and the world around me rippled, and when the car started moving, it was like nothing I had ever felt before. We soared to the top of a hill of glittering quartz, then shot down the glowing road like a bolt of living lightning. I felt the wind whipping at my hair, just like it always did when my friends and I rode down Bachman Hill. My smile widened, and I felt the tears running down my cheeks burn away. Tim's hand squeezed my shoulder. We were finally free. Free of small towns, stop signs, and country roads with low speed limits. And as we turned off of the crystal drag and merged onto a rainbow highway, I finally understood. Life doesn't wait for you to find your way. It doesn't tell you when you've missed your exit or warn you when there's construction ahead. In real life, the kind they don't show you in the movies or teach you about in school, there's no slowing down, and there's certainly no stopping. All there is the open road, and you're lucky just to have someone to go with. In the Headlights was written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and adapted from his short story of the same name. It was edited by Jeffrey Lavin, with music composed and performed by Samantha Hunt. Brandon, the narrator, was played by Quinn Farner. Jonathan Inbody played Tim, Eric Miller played Patrick, and Justin Pope played Doug. Gray Matter is a Word Search Media production. Any similarities to real people, places, or things is purely coincidental. Be kind. Rewind.